Welcome to Matrix Games World in Flames Training Video Chapter 5. Chapter 5 covers turns, impulses, weather, and supply. These correspond to tutorials number 7 and number 9 in the picture and text tutorials. The training video does not cover tutorial number 8 on zones of control. World in Flames has fairly standard rules for zones of control, and if you're unfamiliar with the term, then you should look at tutorial number 8. What you're seeing here is the first page of tutorial number 7, Turns, Impulses, and Weather. There are 6 weather zones within World in Flames. They're irregularly shaped, as you can see here. The northernmost is the Arctic, followed by the North Temperate, the Mediterranean, North Monsoon, South Monsoon, and South Temperate. The zones themselves never change. They're always just as they're depicted here. You might notice that the Mediterranean is only a small area, and it doesn't extend all the way across like the other 5 zones do. What that means is that the North Temperate abuts directly to the North Monsoon throughout most of Asia, and in particular that's true within China, so that China has North Temperate in the north and North Monsoon in the south. Here's the weather report page. It gives you the current weather and informs you what the die roll was, just in case you're curious. The weather in this case is fine in all of the 6 weather zones. There is no modifier for the next die roll, and the impulse is advancing by 1 each time. We'll discuss that more in a minute. The weather report also gives you the probabilities of what the weather is going to be the next time the die roll for the weather occurs. Again, the die rolls for weather are on the odd impulses, 1, 3, 5, and 7. So the next time we roll the die, there's going to be no modifier, and there's a 40% chance of fine weather in the Arctic, 40% chance of rain, 20 storm, and so on. It's a 100% guarantee that it's going to be fine weather in the South Temperate. This is a close-up of the detailed map showing you where the weather zones occur. The North Temperate are in this light aqua color, and the North Monsoon is in the green. The white line indicates the weather boundary. So North Monsoon is in China and also in Formosa, and the North Temperate runs around it. This is fairly common. The weather zone for a sea area is the same throughout the sea area. The sea area does not have 2 weather zones, it only has 1. The little symbols that you see here for North Monsoon and North Temperate are optional. They can be toggled off, and most of the time you will have them toggled off. Here's the same page that you were just looking at, only this time we've toggled off the indicators for North Monsoon and South Monsoon, and we've put in the overlays for the weather. So the North Temperate has a blizzard, and the North Monsoon is experiencing rain. Out at sea, there are 3 types of weather. There's fine, there's rain and snow, and in this case you're seeing storm and blizzard. The difference between storm and blizzard is 0 when you're at sea. It's quite different when you're on land, though. Storm and blizzard at sea is shown with little lightning bolts running through it. Rain is shown as a slight intermixing of small black lines. If it were snowing, these black lines would be white, and that would differentiate between the blizzard, which is a heavy driving white line. Likewise, if it were storm, the white lines for blizzard would be replaced by black lines. For example, here's rain and storm. Here's a weather boundary, and when a weather boundary coincides with a sea boundary, the dark blue and the white intermix. The dark blue is a pure sea boundary, the white is a pure weather boundary, and where they overlie, there's a dashed effect. So you can see rain versus storm, and you can see rough seas here as opposed to the heavy seas, which are storm and blizzard. Here's another view of the overlays. In this case, blizzard is dominating in the weather zones above this white line, and also a weather zone above this white line. There's rain in this area within this weather zone boundary, and there's snow in this area within this weather zone. Again, there's a dashed line when the weather zone overlies a country boundary. So here's a country border, and here's a country border where the weather zone overlies. What you've probably noticed is that though it's snowing down in this area, a whole lot of the hexes have clear weather, have fine weather. And that's because desert, both desert and desert mountain, tempers snow, in other words, reduces it, so that it's just fine weather. The same effect happens when it's raining. So it's raining in these clear hexes, but in the desert, the rain is changed to just being fine weather. Desert also tempers blizzard. It doesn't reduce it to fine, but it brings it down one notch to merely snow. Likewise, not shown here, desert would temper a storm and reduce it to rain. Going back to this page, I want to draw your attention to how the global map depicts weather. The detailed map has rain and storm, and that small black box down here corresponds to the detailed map that you're seeing. On the global map, the rain is shown as a aqua, and the storm is shown as a very dark blue. The other weather types being shown here is blizzard in the Arctic, snow, which is the purple, within the Mediterranean. Again, the snow is tempered into fine over the desert hexes in Africa. Then there's rain and storm. What this page is showing is the effect of the die roll upon the weather in May and June. If you start in May and June and you roll a 1, then this is the weather you get. It's pretty nasty. You've got snow in the north, you've got storm almost everywhere else, and a little bit of rain in the Mediterranean. If you roll a die roll of 2, then you get slightly improved weather. You're getting rain in the south temperate, you're getting storm through here, storm in the Arctic, and some rain throughout the rest. Even a die roll of 3 is going to produce some storms throughout the monsoon areas and some rain in the north. A die roll of 4, 5, and 6 are all the same, and they're all showing rain throughout the north monsoon. But a die roll of 7, 8, 9, and 10 is fine weather everywhere. And if you were adding to the die roll from the previous die roll, if you had a modifier of +1 or +2, then instead of the die roll being between 1 and 10, it would be between 2 and 11. Or if you were adding 2, the die roll would be between 3 and 12. So if you're adding 2, you're guaranteed some really fine weather throughout most of the map. In July and August, the lower die roll, 1, gives you perfect weather or fine weather for combat. 2, 3, 4 are all the same. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are all the same. They're showing storm in the monsoon area. But if you're adding to this die roll, if you have a +1 or +2 on the die, then you're getting some pretty nasty weather. You could get a 12 and have this result. There are numbers within each of the die rolls, and there is also asterisks for some of them. The number indicates how far the impulse number advances. So in this case, if you roll a 1, the impulse number goes up by 2. So you would go from impulse 1 to impulse 3 to impulse 5. But if you rolled any of these other numbers, say an 8, then you would have the impulse number going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. July and August has the same effect, with a die roll incrementing by 1 most of the time, and a couple chances of it going up by 2. The asterisks in red within the white circles are how much the die roll is modified for the next time you roll the weather. So you would add 2 to the die roll here, you would add 1 here, and for the rest of the possible die rolls you would not add anything. In July and August, if you rolled a 10, you would add 1 to the die roll for the next time you rolled the weather. unless you had already been adding 1 or 2, in which case when you roll a 10 you're going to be adding 2 to the die roll. Again, to summarize, the 1 is the impulse advance, and the red asterisks are the die roll modifiers. Here's what September, October, and November, December weather rolls look like. In September and October, you've got 4 shots at having perfect weather, and you have more or less 3 opportunities for getting rain in the Arctic and the monsoon area. But you also have a fairly significant risk with an 8, 9, or 10 of getting some pretty bad weather. Also, you're getting modifiers for the die rolls, and your impulse is going up by 2. If you roll high and you have modifiers, you're going to get blizzard in the north, snow in the Mediterranean, and otherwise just generally nasty stuff. November, December has only 2 shots at getting fine weather everywhere. If you roll a 3 or a 4, you're getting snow in the Arctic and possibly also the North Temperate. And on a 5, you're getting storms and snow and snow. On a 9, 10, 11, and 12, you're getting blizzard. And the die roll is actually has a pretty good chance of getting a modifier of +2, and the impulse is going up by 3. So the impulse numbers would go 1, 4, 7, 10, and so on. So let's look at a September-October turn. You come into this, and let's say there's no die roll modifier. So let's assume that on the first die roll, you roll a 6. The first impulse would have impulse number 1. The second impulse would be numbered 3 because you're increasing it by 2. And on the third impulse, it would be impulse number 5. If at that time you then rolled a 2, your increase would be by 1. The weather would be fine everywhere. So the impulse numbers would be 1, 3, 5, and then it would go up by 1, so it would be 6 and 7. If you then rolled a 6 again, it would go from 7 to 9 to 11. So the impulse numbers are not necessarily consecutive. They could be interspersed by 2, or down in November, December, they could be jumping by 3. You could have impulse numbers 1, 4, 7, and then if you rolled well and you only had it increase by 1, following 7 you would have 8 and 9, and then if you rolled into the 2 category you would have 11 and 13. This is a little bit tricky, but the computer keeps track of everything, and it'll also provide you with information as to what the probabilities are of the weather changing and what the probabilities are of the modifiers. Moving on to tutorial number 9, supply. Supply is very complex within World in Flames. Basic supply is easy. A unit traces to a primary supply source, and it's 4 hexes. Any kind of hexes work, though you can't go through an all-pine hex side or across an all-sea hex side. So most of these units are already in primary supply points, which are cities within your home country. The only exception would be this Navarre down here, which is not in a city, and it can trace to Yokohama pretty easily. It can't go directly because that's an all-sea hex side, but it could go 1, 2, tracing through this strait, or this way, 1, 2. Or it could just go straight to Tokyo, 1, 2. All of these, like Sendai and the other cities over here, are all supply sources for the Japanese because they're cities within the home country. You can also use cities that belong to your cooperating major powers. The Germans and the Italians cooperate, so the German units in Italy can use Venice as a primary supply source. Again, the path is 4 hexes, and the Italians obviously are in supply. They're sitting in Rome, for instance. For the Commonwealth, all of the member nations of the Commonwealth, which are Canada, United Kingdom, South Africa, India, Australia, and New Zealand, all 6 of those countries are considered home countries for the Commonwealth and serve as supply sources for all Commonwealth units. In this case, we're looking at 2 South African units, and they're tracing to cities within South Africa. They could trace to Durban or to Johannesburg. They don't have to trace to the capital. Supply cannot trace through a zone of control or through neutral countries. So this French unit is out of supply. In fact, it's isolated, which is what the red dot means. It cannot trace through Sweden because Sweden is neutral. And it cannot trace through Lyon through this hex because the Italian units exert a zone of control here. The Italian units cannot trace through the Alpine hex side, but they can trace through their own units going back to Genoa. 1, 2, 3, 4. So these units are within 4 hexes of Genoa. In fact, they're within 3 hexes of Turin, which is located here. All the Italian units are in supply. This French unit is in supply because it's tracing to Marseille, but the cavalry is out of supply. Here's the same situation, but with the weather changing. When the weather changes to rain or to blizzard or to storm, the supply line goes to 2 hexes. The cavalry is still isolated, but now the Italian units are out of supply because they cannot reach Turin in 2 moves, 2 hexes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. If they could go through the Alpine hex side, they would be in supply, but they cannot. And there's another Alpine hex side here, which is also blocking them. So they have to go in through this motorized unit. Notice that the presence of the motorized unit does prevent the zone of control from blocking supply. If the French were able to move a second unit into this hex, the cavalry unit would then become in supply through its friendly unit back to Lyon. Here's a little bit more of weather. Snow only reduces the weather path to 3, and that's summarized here. In fine weather, it's 4 hexes, in snow it's 3, and in rain, storm, and blizzard, it's only 2 hexes to get back to your primary supply source. The minor country units, like Finland, can trace back to Finnish hexes, such as Tampere here. All of these units are able to trace back to Tampere within 3 hexes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You might wonder why the headquarters is able to trace over this lake hex side to Tampere. And the reason is that in snow, all the lakes freeze, and it's as if they didn't exist at all. So the lake hex sides can be ignored for tracing supply, 1, 2, back to Tampere. In rain, the path is only 2 hexes, and so therefore only the units in the south are in supply to Tampere. The others have to reach 3 hexes, and in fact the headquarters would have to trace 1, 2, 3, 4, since it could not go over the all lake hex sides here, here, and here. It would have to go back to the mechanized unit and then carry on. Besides tracing directly to a primary supply source, this would be a unit to its primary supply source indicated by the first, you might also be tracing overseas. You could do this as 4 basic hexes. The hexes would count first as land, and then the sea area, or in fact all contiguous sea areas, which means connected, would count as 1 hex, 1 basic supply path hex. So the Commonwealth units, which are overseas, need to trace back to the United Kingdom, a city in the United Kingdom which is a primary supply source. The headquarters can trace 1 into the North Sea and then into Hull, which would be a primary supply source, a path of 2. The mechanized unit would have to trace first to the headquarters, which is in a port, and then to the North Sea. So it's 1, 2 to the North Sea, and 3 into Hull. This is indicated in an abstract here. The unit traces to a port, it then traces to another port, and then it traces to a primary supply source. This means that units in Gibraltar could trace through contiguous sea areas all the way back to Hull, and it would only cost them 2 hexes within the basic supply path. 1 to get into the sea areas, and then using all the contiguous sea areas, 2 to come back into Hull. You can also use headquarters if you don't have a port, and that's the situation here for the Commonwealth units that are in Sardinia. They're able to trace to this headquarters, Alexander, and then Alexander traces to a sea area, and the sea area is all the way back to England. So this divisional motorized infantry traces 1 to the headquarters, and then the headquarters traces 2 to the sea area and 3 back to England. The headquarters also acts as a secondary supply source. Besides headquarters, other secondary supply sources are capitals of captured minored countries. So, for instance, the artillery unit here would trace to Brussels, which is a captured minor country, and that serves as a secondary supply source. Secondary supply sources can use rail lines, infinite number of rail lines, to get back to the home country. So clearly Brussels can get back using rail hexes to a primary supply source in Germany for this artillery unit. The rule is that you have 4 basic path hexes to get to a secondary supply source, then an infinite number of connected rail hexes, and in fact the connected rail hexes can also include 4 more basic supply path. The secondary supply source to the primary supply source is the only time that railway paths can be used. Otherwise you're using a basic supply path. So for instance, the German units here could trace to this headquarters unit with which they cooperate, and then the headquarters unit, serving as a secondary supply source, can use the rail lines to get back to Germany and put all these units in supply over here. You can also have secondary supply sources and intermixed with contiguous sea areas. This is the situation for the units that Japan has in China. Japan's primary supply sources are all back in the homeland, Japan, and basically they need to go through sea areas to get there. What happens here is that this headquarters is supplying these units. The units trace to the headquarters, a basic supply path of 4. The headquarters then traces to a rail line, and there's a rail line here, or they could trace 1, 2, 3, 4 to this rail line. But the headquarters traces to the rail line, and then the rail line traces to a port, and then the port goes overseas. In the abstract, it's unit to secondary supply source, a headquarters, which then goes to a port, goes overseas, goes to a port, goes back to the primary supply source. If need be, you could actually use the rail lines to get to this primary supply source from the port. You can only use one link of going over contiguous sea areas. If you need to do it twice, if you need to go land, sea, land, then that's not allowed, and the supply path would be broken. One set of contiguous sea areas bordered by either ports or headquarters is the limit for supply lines. There are also tertiary supply sources. These are fairly simple. Tertiary are identical to secondary. They're headquarters or they are capitals of captured minor countries. The difference between tertiary and secondary is that the secondary can use the supply path going over a rail line. Tertiary has to use a basic path of 4 hexes. So the combat unit would go to, say, one headquarters, which would then trace to a second headquarters, which would then use a rail line to trace back to the country. That happens here. This partisan unit has landed in the middle of the Germans, and it's blocking a lot of their supply. So the units up here are tracing to a headquarters, which then traces to another headquarters, which then uses the rail lines in order to go back to Germany. This is a summary page in the abstract of all the different supply lines. The basic supply path, 4 hexes, 3 in snow, 2 in rain, blizzard, and storm. The railway supply path shown as a dashed red line, and the overseas shown as blue. The basic supply path is a unit to its primary, or a unit going through a sea area to its primary, or going straight from a coastal hex to its primary overseas, and likewise going through secondary supply sources and combining that with overseas, or combining the secondary with the rail lines both before and after going overseas, and bringing in tertiaries in order to get to the secondaries. Notice there's only one contiguous sea area here, but all of these units would be able to trace back to this primary supply source. Both primary and secondary supply sources can supply an infinite number of units. So you never draw it down to zero. You never have to calculate how many units are going to a supply source. They all are infinite, including the supply lines and the overseas supply lines. And this concludes Chapter 5 of the training video for World in Flames.